Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our nonprofit capacity building series session number 3. And we will be featuring our financials from our grant process that just began actually last Wednesday, January 8th. My name is Terry Raskin, and I'm the VP of Grants and Community Leadership. I hope to be joined in a few moments by my colleague Jennifer Cochran, who helps me facilitate all of our grant processes here at the Community Foundation. And welcome. We hope that today will provide you with some clear instructions and guidance and offer you an opportunity, honestly, to ask some questions that you may have around the financials that we're requesting for the applications. And we look forward to engaging our newest supporter here at the foundation, our strategic financial partner to the Community Foundation, Brian Crowe, who I'll be introducing in a moment. So we can move forward with the slide. Great. And there's Jennifer Cochran, who hopefully, if you have any questions or you've had questions to this point, you've been able to connect with either Jennifer or myself to schedule office hours so we can review just basic information that you may have or questions that you may have about what you're thinking about submitting or help you problem solve around the application. And again, Brian, we're thrilled to have you here. Brian has recently joined us to help us here at the foundation to help us, figure out who we are moving forward and help us improve some of our internal systems. This is an example of that. And Brian, if you could take a few moments to introduce yourself, that would be great. And we welcome you to the session.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that. So, as mentioned, my name is Brian Crowe, and I'm originally from Western Kentucky, but I've been in DC now for 18 years, just going on 18 years. Most of my experience is now in nonprofit. I started out in banking and public accounting, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with the team.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today. And I know you will be a great resource to the organizations that are on the call and then potentially during this process. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And we can begin if you'd like, just to go through.
Oh, sure. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I didn't know if there was more to come there.
There is no more. There will be many questions, something tells me, after your presentation, but this is, yes, this is the beginning of the presentation. So thank you very much.
Got it. Thank you. Sorry. So again, afternoon. I'm going to just take a few minutes to walk through, I think, 2 examples that I think will make some of this a little more clear. And then as we feel free to ask questions. And if you guys could monitor the chat, that would also be helpful. And then I'll say if for some reason we don't get to any questions and there are follow-ups, please email sorry, and we'll try to follow up to help you with your submission as best as possible. If you could, Jennifer, just go one down, please, on the because I'll touch on these on the statement. Thank you. Yes, and thank you. Yeah, if everyone can see that. So there's a lot of numbers on this page. I'll walk briefly, through this, but this is a good example where a picture is worth 1,000 words. Now, for simplification purposes, I've combined the actual budget here and along with the current year's budget for the current year, and then added a column for the future year or the current year budget, related to the statement of activities, or otherwise known as the P&L. And I guess I should just explain that for just a second. A lot of people call this a profit and loss statement. It can also be called a statement of activities. In non-for-profit audited financial statements, it's almost always referred to as a statement of activities. It's got various forms. Yours may look a little bit different, but this is just the example that I thought would be easiest and also keeps us from having to go back and forth between slides. Just like your favorite book, awesome there. You go back, yeah. Just like your favorite book, nonprofit P&Ls or standard activity reports are meant to be read left to right and then up to down. And so I'm going to start with that and sort of break it into a few sections and just talk through. On the left side, you'll see operating activities section, and where you see revenue and expenses, and then a change in net assets before non-operating activities, and then a non-operating activities section. And that is really done for purposes of showing just the core activities that the organization is involved in doing, which in this case is, almost always programmatic. The non-operating activities are excluded sort of below that line for the purpose of, well, in this case, there's investments income there. And so the organization is not doesn't exist to invest in assets. And so that's shown outside of its core operations. Excuse me. Going back up to the top there and working from left to right, you'll see 4 columns. There's a year-to-date actual column. There's a budgeted column for that current year, and then 2 variance columns there. And those 2 variance columns are helpful in the sense that they show scope and sort of scale. So in other words, if a column is 400% over budget or under budget, but it's a $5,000 line item or category, it is less relevant to the user, right? It doesn't mean as much information wise. And so those 2 combinations are helpful. And then to the right of that is just red and green arrows. And some of this is just best practices to, again, help the reader more quickly identify what is useful information at just a glance. And you may have different categories, both for revenue and expenses. I will say, in terms of, I've seen a lot of reports that have a lot of very detail. It is helpful that you, in the case, again, for the reviewer, to combine groups, if liked groups, to the extent that that's available or applicable, can be combined, because it makes it easier to read for the reviewer. And then I'll keep going to the right there. On the far right and highlighted in a different column is the current year's budget. And that is similar categories as the other, but just shown on here again on the same page. Doesn't have to be shown on the same page, but is in this case to have fewer slides to go back and forth between. I'll also add that you'll see at the bottom, or the change in net assets figure. In this case, it's a balanced budget for both the current year and the previous year. While that is obviously best case scenario and best practice, that is far from common in nonprofit accounting. And this is predominantly because a lot of times companies will receive a gift at the end of one year and not start spending on it until the next year. And so it's very common to see a big surplus in one year and then followed by a rather large deficit in the next year. And for this reason, I will draw your attention to the very bottom of the screen there where you see footnotes. And those footnotes can be helpful, particularly again to the reader, for explaining those differences, those major swings or significant items as helpful. So I've said a lot of information there. I can add a little more if helpful, but maybe I should pause for questions. I'm checking.
There's nothing coming in on the chat yet.
Okay.
Let's see. Let me make sure of that. I'm realizing.
Hey, Sari and Brian, there are no questions
Okay.
pertaining to the presentation thus far, but
Okay.
I'll be on the lookout for those questions as we move along.
Okay, great. Well, and again, I apologize if I'm covering ground here that people are already very well familiar with. We'll get to I guess any items that you may have questions about in a minute. If you, Amanda or Jennifer, could just go to the next slide then on the balance sheet, that would be helpful. So moving on to the balance sheet, and again, this is a new request, and if I didn't say this earlier, I meant to. The whole purpose of these financials, and in particularly this new request for the balance sheet, is to assess the health of the organization. I mean, that's the intention behind it. That plus, knowing and understanding where your organization is spending in Northern Virginia, where they're investing and how they're doing. Now, in its simplest terms, balance sheet is just a snapshot in time. And for that reason, it looks different, quite different from the P&L and the statement of activities. I should also back up to say the balance sheet in nonprofit accounting is often referred to as a statement of financial position, but they're this, just like the profit and loss statement is sometimes called the statement of activities. The balance sheet can also be called the statement of financial position, and they're one and the same. Uh, so let me get back to snapshot in time. The composition of this was read the same way, left to right, up to down, and always starts with assets at the top, and then is followed by liabilities, and then equity. Now, in this case, FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board, requests, I guess, mandates that the section is called equity section in nonprofits is called net assets. And the main reason for that is the thought that equity tends to distinguish more to shareholder ownership, which is not the case here. And so that is one difference. So if you hear me say equity or net assets, again, I'm referring to the same thing. There are some major differences, though, between equity and a for-profit versus a nonprofit. And I'm going to get into that in just a minute. Before I do, though, I just want to sort of go through the generic form or formula for a balance sheet. You start out with assets, and assets will always equal liabilities plus the equity or net assets section. If for some reason that formula doesn't exist, and you have a problem or an error that you need to look for. Now, I presume everyone here knows the difference between assets and liabilities, so I won't spend any time on that, but I do want to talk a little bit about the equity section. And excuse me, here in this example, I've divided this up between without donor restriction and with donor restriction. And FASB changed this language about 4 or 5 years ago. It used to be called unrestricted versus restricted. And in doing so, there was a permanently restricted category of net assets that they did away with. And they just said it's either restricted for one or more reasons, or it's unrestricted. Now, in this example, I've listed some unrestricted categories, and excuse me, the least restricted of anything is this without donor restriction that is undesignated. And what I mean by that is the board has the purview to designate or earmark for certain purposes or activities. It's up to them. Different funds, different for the organization. And in this case, they have designated, in my example, $750,000 for a reserve. And in that board meeting, there would be, minutes to some degree outlining, the nature of the designation, what criteria it could be, and how long it would occur. And they can, because it's board designated, and they've done it to the organization themselves, they can always undesignate it later if they so choose, which is a major distinction between with donor restriction. That's not something that can be undone. So now getting to that, the other section with donor restriction is follows donor intent, and it can be based on how they want the money spent, where they want it spent, and even the time that they want it spent, all of those characteristics. And in this example, I have listed programs in a memorial fund, just as those that are with restriction. You can go into a little more detail there, and if I get questions here, I'm happy to, on the new sort of guidance there on it can be conditional or unconditional, and some FASB language on barriers to make that be the case, but that may be really outside of the scope of some of these questions or a topic for another day. Again, I'm going to pause and see if we have any questions.
So I see a couple of questions here from not necessarily, I'll tell you what the questions are and you can answer them and tell me what if they're connected to the document that you reviewed previously or this one. Does it help to break out revenues by category of donors, grants from individuals, grants from corporations, grants from nonprofits and foundations, government grants?
I think it can. Some of that depends on what the reviewer wants to see. I will tell you, if you're, so I guess one thing I forgot to say on the, Jennifer, if you don't mind to go back just while we're answering this question to the statement of activities or the P&L, thank you. On the left side there, most of the categories start with, in both revenue and expenses, the highest figure, and then go in descending order. And that, again, is to just help the reader see those. It's easier to read in that way. So if you have a significant amount of each of those and want to show it separately, I don't think it hurts. But if they're small in nature and doesn't give the reader, you don't feel like it gives the reader a lot of additional useful information, I think you could combine them. But I don't know. Sorry if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think that was very helpful. Thank you. I'll go on to there's two other questions actually now. For grants that come in, my understanding is that you can book the dollars to the year that the work will be performed. Is that what you just explained about major donor gifts?
It depends. So it's based on it depends on the language, and if you have a donor agreement, if you just get a check in the door, and it is, there are no restrictions written anywhere on the check. There's not a letter that says, hey, I want this to go to, education or anything like that. It's booked in the year of receipt and would go in that calendar year. If you get a letter with it, or if there's a grant agreement and there are conditions on it that says, as an example, I'm going to use match as a probably the best example. Donor could give grant and say, this grant is for $1 million, but it's conditional on you or the organization being able to spend or match it, for, let's say, 500,000 over the next 12 months or whatever. And in that case, it's conditional and it would be booked differently. So feel free to follow up with that if I didn't explain that well enough.
Okay, great. There's the next question I think I can address. If we are applying for the Child and Youth Development Grant, should the financial info we submit be just the portion of our financials that relates to that area, or all of our financials? It really depends on your organization. If you have a large organization, yes, if you could, and Child and Youth Development is another large portion of your organization. Yes, if you could have the financial information be around what you are applying for, that would be great as well. Brian, do you have anything to add to that? I think you and I had discussed some of these situations, but I think that that's what we had landed on.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. Should grants be booked when awarded or paid?
So are they talking about, is this a revenue or expense?
I think we need some clarification.
It could still depend on, if it's the grant agreement, if there is a grant agreement. So in many cases, I'll just give you some examples here while we're waiting for
revenue. The answer was revenue.
Oh, okay. So paid, you mean received then, or awarded or paid? You mean?
I think it sounds like they have it in hand. Is that correct? Received. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, received. Got it. Yes. So it really is going to depend on the language of that contract or award letter. Again, if it is, but generally speaking, as a general rule, if it's received in that year, it is normally booked in that year when received, provided there are no barriers or conditions to be met. And that's why I was saying earlier, it's not uncommon to receive a grant on the end of the year, fiscal year end, 1 year, but not obviously have spent any of the money and then spend the money in the following year.
Okay. Okay, so one question is, if someone gets a grant of ours, can it go to next year's fiscal year? It depends on your own fiscal year. Our requirement is that the grants will be, the decision will be made in April, checks will be sent out by May 15th, and your grant should be spent out by June 30 of next year, so of 2026.
Sorry, let me follow up too a little bit on
Yes.
that last question as well, just
Thank
as
you.
I'm thinking more about it. there can be grants as pledges, and depending upon the supporting documentation, a pledge can be enough to record as revenue. These are a lot of things that I would run by your auditor. I would encourage that. The more communication you have with them, the better, because it makes their job easier at the end of the year, and it makes you as the organization have fewer adjusting journal entries. So if there are any questions about those things, I would run them by them and just sort of discuss the best treatment. You can always read it and say, this is where we're thinking, any objections.
Great. Okay, another question. So 80% of our budget goes to the operation of our thrift stores, rent, mortgage, insurance, staff salaries. Our budget is around 3 million, but it is misleading because it isn't mission. Can we submit a budget that shows just what is directed to mission, or at least a sub file so you can see that?
So I think what we talked about yesterday,
Yes,
sorry, is that we're really only interested in the work done in Northern Virginia.
correct.
That's what we're trying to measure.
So I think the answer is submitting a budget that is directed to your mission. Exactly. That's what we're interested in seeing. But also there's an opportunity to write anything unusual that you would want to state about your organization. That is where you could address that issue around the thrift store and how there's additional income and also expenses associated with the thrift store as well, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think you could apportion it out if that's, and just again, like include in the footnotes, right? If that's just again, so the reader knows how you came up with it, and
Exactly.
sort of the summary, if you will. I think that would be fun.
And actually, Brian and I had talked yesterday to think about all the different potential scenarios that could be raised today. And I think one of the things that we walked away with from that conversation was that it's just important to have the reader understand the financial health of your organization and demonstrate what effort you are making in our region with the certain focus area and the population that you're describing within your application. That is what is going to be looked at. Tell us a little bit about what your impact is in the region with the population that you are trying to serve.
Sure. And I see one question here. Do you have sample profit and loss balance sheets that we can have access to? Sorry, I know in the past you've given out a template. I think we can provide examples. Is that?
I could definitely send out as a follow-up. We can send out examples for sure. Great. Any other questions that come up? And as a review, if we can go back to the first slide, just kind of going through the different financials to make sure. So again, as you have all seen in both in the application and then also in the communication about this session, these are the documents that we are asking for. If there are any questions about that, I know Brian did go through both profit and loss statement and balance sheet, or any other questions related to those documents, please feel free to ask right now in the chat. Or please feel free to reach as you're starting to work on the application. Feel free to reach out to Jennifer or myself, and we'll pass on questions to Brian for those answers as well.
Yes, and sorry, thank you for that, because I meant to come back to that and didn't.
No worries.
Part of the reason that I included the P&L example on there is I tried to include everything but the balance sheet. So in this case, it includes the previous year actual versus the previous year's budget is that comparison, and there's a variance analysis. There was those two columns. That's the first 4 columns on that previous slide, and then there's the current year budget that's listed, and then of course the balance sheet is on a separate page. So if you wanted to just only submit 2 things, I think you could do it in that format, and I think that would be fine. Sorry, correct me if I'm wrong. I think if they just wanted to focus on last year's and then just have the current year budget, that would also be fine.
Yes, that's correct. Okay. Any other questions? Am I not seeing? No, I think we have them. Amanda, will you move forward on the slides and then we'll just, great. Oh, there's one more question. I apologize for joining late, but can you describe the difference between previous year actual versus budget and P&L for prior year?
Sure. Can you, yeah, thank you. Back to one more
Next
down.
step, yeah.
Yeah. So previous year's budget, say that again in actual.
Between
Make sure.
previous year actual versus budget and P&L for prior year.
Okay, yes. So in this example, and what I think basically we're asking for is we want to see sort of your most recent fiscal year actual compared to budget and the variance there, and then we want to see the current year. And so if you just look at these first two columns here on this profit and loss statement, you'll see actual of, in this case, I've said fiscal year 2024, pretending that's already ended, and then fiscal year 2024 budget is the comparison. Then going forward is the current year's budget wherever you are. Some of this will depend obviously on the fiscal year end, and if you're calendar year end. There is one thing I did want to add. I think I forget. I always think of something right after it's already been said. The importance of having the balance sheet and the profit and loss statement to be within the relative same period is helpful because it shows the symbiotic relationship between the two. So what I mean by that, in the example of let's say your calendar year end, and so your P&L goes through 12/31, you would show that, and then you would run. So that would be cumulative, right, for 12 months. And then you would also run your balance sheet and show that as of the same December 12/31 statement. That way they're in alignment. I don't think I covered that earlier, but I meant to.
So in response to Wendy's question, there's no real difference
Between, well, in format or in, I mean, there is a difference. One's past and one's present. But other than that, I don't think we're asking for variance analysis or actual against budget for the current year. We're only asking for actual against budget for the previous
prior
year.
year. Okay. Yes, that's
helpful.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. Last call for questions. Okay, so quickly.
I think I see one just come in.
One came in.
Yeah,
Is the P&L for the previous fiscal year an actual versus budget for current first fiscal year?
This fiscal year, actually. I no, I think we only want, so you probably are measuring yourself against actual versus budget in the current year. However, what we're asking for is actual versus budget for the prior year and just the budget for the current year. Does that make sense?
Me. It says, thank you. Challenging when you have non-accountants talking to financial experts or financial experts talking to non-accountants.
Not at all. That's why I put that last slide on there or added it.
It's great. We can slide it. Yes.
Yeah, I ask for gobbledygook. This is mumbo jumbo. That's very spot on.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. I think that, again, if people have questions as they're trying to work on their documents, feel free to reach out to us. And there may be questions also when you're preparing the documents and others are helping you that other questions may be raised. So again, see us as a resource. And all of our grant cycle information, including FAQs, the webinar recording that we did from last Wednesday, and the PowerPoint slides from that session, the overview of our 2025 grant process, are all located on our website, www.cfnova.org. So feel free to look, or you can use the QR code for the information. And if you want to sign up for office hours, we can also send you a link to that. So please reach out to us, to either Jennifer or myself, and we will send you the link to the office hours. And they're scheduled for the next couple of weeks. They're 15-minute time slots that we can meet with you and just talk through your application ideas and what you're thinking, and hopefully help you out with that to clarify where the best place, where there will be the best fit. And then before I sign off, I want to go back to the slide before, just letting everyone know, thank you, that our upcoming deep dive session through Insight Region with our Senior Director, Dr. Denise Bellows, is on January 29th. We hope you'll join us. And then our Shape of the Region conference, please mark your calendars, March 25th, focus on the health and safety of youth in Northern Virginia. So we look forward to helping you along this process, and then also hopefully seeing you at our upcoming events as well. So with that, again, we are here for office hours. We are here for additional questions, but we thank you for joining us. And again, this session has been recorded and will be available just to, if you want to listen to things and maybe go back and hear and pay attention to certain aspects. It is here as a resource to you, and hope it will be helpful to you. So thank you very much for joining us.